Jake Martinez walked through the doors of Roosevelt High School like he was entering enemy territory. His gray eyes swept the hallway, noting exit routes and blind spots without thinking about it. 6 months ago, he was fighting aliens on Europa. Now he was trying to be a normal teenager again. The morning bell rang, and students rushed past him to their classes. Jake moved against the flow of people, his enhanced reflexes making him dodge backpacks and shoulders with movements that looked too smooth for a regular kid. He found his locker and spun the combination lock with practiced precision. "Hey, new guy," a voice called out behind him. Jake turned to see a tall boy with blonde hair and a letterman jacket. Tony Blake, the quarterback. Jake had done his research before picking this school. He knew who the important people were, just like he used to know which buildings held enemy snipers. "Yeah," Jake said, keeping his voice neutral. "You're in my spot," Tony said, gesturing to the locker next to Jake's. "I always meet my friends here, before first period." Jake looked at the locker. It wasn't Tony's. The name tag said it belonged to some kid named Peter, but Jake had learned to pick his battles carefully. He grabbed his books and closed his locker. "No problem," he said, stepping away. Tony seemed surprised. Most kids would have argued or gotten angry. Jake just walked away like it didn't matter. That bothered Tony more than a fight would have done in first period English. Jake sat in the back corner where he could see the whole room. The teacher, Mrs. Davis, was talking about some poem, but Jake's mind wandered to the last time he sat in a briefing room. Commander Torres had been explaining the mission parameters for the Europa assault. 57 soldiers went down to that frozen moon. Only 32 came back. "Mr. Martinez," Mrs. Davis called out, "would you like to share your thoughts on the symbolism in this passage?" Jake looked down at his book. He hadn't been paying attention, but the words on the page seemed to jump out at him. Something about soldiers and war and coming home. "I think," Jake said slowly, "the writer is talking about how hard it is to fit in somewhere new after you've been through something that changed you." Mrs. Davis nodded approvingly. "That's a very mature interpretation. Have you experienced something like that yourself?" Jake's jaw tightened slightly. "Something like that," he said at lunch. Jake found a table in the corner of the cafeteria. He ate his sandwich methodically, chewing each bite exactly 20 times, like they taught him in survival training. It helped him stay calm and think clearly. "Mind if I sit here?" Jake looked up to see a small girl with dark hair and glasses. She was holding a science fiction novel and looked nervous. "Go ahead," Jake said. The girl sat down and opened her book. "I'm Amy Foster," she said without looking up. "I saw you in the library yesterday. You were reading about military history." Jake nodded. "Yeah, I find it interesting." "Me too. Well, not just military stuff. I liked reading about space battles and alien invasions." "Silly, I know." Amy smiled shyly. Jake almost smiled back. If only she knew how real those alien invasions could be. "Not silly at all," he said. "Good to be prepared." Their conversation was interrupted by a loud crash. Tony Blake had accidentally knocked over a trash can while walking past their table. Garbage scattered across the floor. "Oops," Tony said with a smirk. "Guess somebody should clean that up." He looked directly at Jake, waiting for a reaction. Jake calmly finished his sandwich, then stood up and started picking up the trash. Amy jumped up to help him. "You don't have to do that," she whispered. "It's okay," Jake said quietly. "Not worth the fight." Tony watched them clean up his mess, confusion replacing his smirk. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. New kids were supposed to get angry or scared. Jake just seemed. Emptied out after lunch, Jake had gym class. The teacher, Coach Miller, divided them into teams for basketball. Jake ended up guarding Tony, who was at least 4 inches taller and 40 pounds heavier. "You're pretty small for a fighter," Tony said as they ran down the court. "I'm not a fighter," Jake replied, easily keeping pace despite his smaller size. Tony tried to shoulder check Jake as they went for a rebound, but something strange happened. Instead of getting knocked over, Jake seemed to flow around the contact like water. He ended up with the ball, but instead of taking the shot, he passed it to a teammate. What the hell was that? Tony muttered. Jake just shrugged, but inside he was cursing himself. His enhanced reflexes had kicked in automatically. He needed to be more careful. The real problem started after gym class. Jake was walking to his locker when Tony and two of his friends cornered him in an empty hallway. "I don't like you," Tony said, stepping closer. "There's something weird about you." Jake's tactical mind automatically assessed the situation. 3 opponents, narrow hallway, multiple escape routes. Tony was the primary threat, but the other 2 could flank him if he wasn't careful. His hands twitched slightly, muscle memory wanting to reach for weapons that weren't there. "I don't want any trouble," Jake said, keeping his voice steady. "Too bad," Tony said, shoving Jake against the lockers. A metal bang echoed down the hallway. For a split second, Jake wasn't in Roosevelt High School anymore. He was back in the underground tunnels of Europa, and that sound was enemy fire hitting the walls around him. His body tensed, ready for combat. But then he saw Amy Foster at the end of the hallway, watching with wide, frightened eyes. She looked like the colonist children he used to protect, innocent, vulnerable. Jake forced himself to relax. He couldn't let his training take over. Not here, not around civilians. "Like I said," Jake repeated. "I don't want trouble." Tony shoved him again, harder this time. Jake let himself be pushed, absorbing the impact without fighting back. The confusion in Tony's eyes grew deeper. "What's wrong with you?" Tony demanded. "Why won't you fight back?" Jake looked at him with those gray eyes that had seen too much. "Because," he said quietly, "you have no idea what a real fight looks like." Something in his voice made Tony step back. There was no anger in it, no fear. Just a cold certainty that sent chills down Tony's spine. The bell rang, and students started filling the hallway. Tony and his friends melted away into the crowd, but Jake knew this wasn't over. He'd made Tony look weak by not fighting back, and that was dangerous. Jake walked to his next class, his mind already working on the problem. He needed to find a way to handle this situation without revealing what he really was. The last thing he wanted was for his classmates to learn that the quiet, transfer student had spent the last 2 years killing aliens in space. As he sat down. In chemistry class, Jake caught sight of Amy Foster giving him a grateful smile from across the room. She reminded him why he'd requested early discharge from the military. Some things were worth protecting, even if it meant fighting a different kind of war. He just hoped he could win this one without anyone getting hurt. The next morning, Jake found his locker covered in sticky notes. They all had the same message written in different handwriting. Coward. He pulled them off one by one, crumpling each paper ball and dropping it in the trash can. Tony Blake watched from down the hall with a satisfied grin. He had gotten his friends to help with the prank, expecting Jake to get angry or embarrassed. Instead, Jake cleaned up the mess like it was just another chore. "This is getting boring," Danny Cruz said. To Tony. Danny was Tony's best friend and second in command of their little group. "The guy doesn't react to anything. He will," Tony said. "Everyone breaks eventually, but Jake wasn't breaking. He was adapting. In the military, he had learned to handle psychological warfare from alien species that could mess with human minds. High school bullies were child's play compared to that. During lunch, Jake sat with Amy Foster again. She was reading a book about space marines fighting bug-like aliens. Jake almost laughed at how close to reality it was. "Do you think humans could really fight aliens?" Amy asked suddenly. Jake looked up from his sandwich. What do you mean? In the books, humans always win because we're tougher or smarter or more determined. But what if real aliens were stronger than us? Jake was quiet for a moment. He remembered the first time he saw a Kitharan warrior up close. 8 feet tall, covered in natural armor, with claws that could cut through steel. The only reason humans had won was because they fought smarter, not harder. I think, Jake said carefully, humans would find a way. We're good at adapting. Amy smiled. I like that idea, that we don't give up. Their conversation was interrupted when Tony's group walked by their table. This time, instead of knocking something over, Tony, accidentally, bumped into Amy's chair. Her book went flying, and her drink spilled all over her lap. Oh, sorry about that, Tony said with fake concern. Maybe you should watch where you're sitting. Amy's face turned red as other students turned to look. Jake felt something cold and angry rise in his chest. This wasn't about him anymore. Tony was going after an innocent person just to get to him. Jake stood up slowly. Tony smiled, thinking he had finally gotten a reaction. You need to apologize, Jake said quietly. I already did, Tony replied. Accidents happen. That wasn't an accident, Jake said. His voice was still calm, but there was something underneath it that made the nearby students stop talking. Tony stepped closer, trying to use his height advantage. You calling me a liar? Jake looked up at him without flinching. I'm saying you should apologize to her properly. For a moment, the cafeteria was silent. Tony's friends waited to see what he would do. Amy sat frozen in her chair, not sure if she should run or stay. Then Tony laughed. Or what? You'll make me? Jake didn't answer. He just stared at Tony with those gray eyes that seemed to see right through him. After a few seconds, Tony felt uncomfortable and looked away. Whatever, Tony muttered. Come on, guys. He walked away with his friends, but Jake could tell this was far from over. Tony's pride was hurt, and that made him more dangerous. That afternoon in history class, Jake sat in his usual back corner seat. The teacher, Mr. Kevin Wright, was talking about World War II. Jake knew more about modern warfare than most adults. But he kept quiet and took notes. After class, Mr. Wright asked Jake to stay behind. You're new here, right? Mr. Wright said, closing the door. Yes, sir, Jake replied. I couldn't help but notice you seem to know a lot about military tactics. More than most kids your age. Jake tensed slightly. I read a lot of books. Mr. Wright nodded slowly. He was in his 40s, with graying hair and a slight limp. I served in the Marines for 8 years. I know the look of someone who's seen real action. Jake didn't say anything, but his body language told Mr. Wright everything he needed to know. Listen, son, Mr. Wright said gently, I don't know your story, and I won't push you to tell it. But if you ever need someone to talk to, someone who might understand, I'm here. Jake felt a weight lift off his shoulders. Someone finally understood that he wasn't just another teenager. Thank you, sir, Jake said. And Jake, Mr. Wright added, be careful around Tony Blake. He's used to getting his way, and he doesn't like being challenged. The warning proved accurate. Over the next few days, Tony's harassment got worse. He would slam Jake's locker shut when Jake was trying to get his books. He would trip him in the hallways when teachers weren't looking. He even convinced some other students to start avoiding Jake, spreading rumors that he was weird and dangerous. But the worst part was when Tony started targeting Amy. Jake was walking to his next class when he heard crying from an empty classroom. He looked inside and saw Amy sitting at a desk with her head in her hands. Amy? What's wrong? Jake asked, stepping into the room. She looked up with red eyes. Tony and his friends cornered me after English class. They said I was a freak for hanging out with you. They knocked my books down and stepped on them. Jake felt his hands clench into fists. This was exactly what he had been afraid of. His problems were affecting innocent people. "I'm sorry," he said. "This is my fault." "No, it's not," Amy said, wiping her eyes. "You didn't do anything wrong. Tony's just a bully." Jake knelt down beside her desk. "Amy, I need you to stay away from me for a while. Just until this blows over." "But you're my friend," she protested. "That's exactly why you need to stay away. Tony's using you to get to me. If you're not around me, he'll leave you alone." Amy looked hurt, but she nodded. "I understand. But Jake, don't let him win." That night, Jake sat in his small bedroom, staring at a photo on his desk. It showed him in military uniform with his squad on Europa. Most of those faces were gone now, killed in the war against the Kitherans. He picked up his secure phone and dialed a number he had memorized. "Martinez, is that you?" The voice on the other end belonged to Commander Lisa Torres, his former commanding officer. "Yes, ma'am. I need to talk to someone." "Are you having trouble adjusting to civilian life?" Jake told her about the bullying, about Tony, about Amy getting hurt because of him. Commander Torres listened without interrupting. "You know," she said when he finished, "the hardest part about being a soldier isn't learning how to fight. It's learning when not to fight." "I don't know what to do," Jake admitted. "If I fight back, I could seriously hurt someone. But if I don't, innocent people get hurt." "There's a third option," Commander Torres said. "You could get help." "From who?" "There's a doctor I know, Dr. Alex Kim. He specializes in helping veterans adjust to civilian life. He's helped a lot of soldiers who felt lost after coming home." Jake was quiet for a moment. Will he understand? Better than anyone. He's been through it himself. After hanging up, Jake felt a little better. But he also knew that things with Tony were going to get worse before they got better. Tony's pride was wounded, and wounded animals were always the most dangerous. Outside his window, the city lights twinkled like stars. It reminded him of the view from his transport ship when they left Europa for the last time. He had thought. The war was over then. Now he was starting to realize that some wars never really end. They just change battlefields. Jake met Dr. Alex Kim at a small office downtown after school. The doctor was younger than Jake expected, maybe in his 30s, with kind eyes and a calm voice. "Commander Torres told me about your situation," Dr. Kim said as they sat down. "How are you handling the transition to civilian life?" Jake shifted in his chair. "It's harder than I thought it would be." "Tell me about school." Jake explained about Tony and the bullying, about Amy getting hurt, about feeling like he was stuck between two worlds. Dr. Kim listened carefully, taking notes. "You know," Dr. Kim said when Jake finished, "I went through something similar when I came back from the Martian colonies. The hardest part wasn't the physical adjustment. It was feeling like nobody understood what I'd been through." "You served?" Jake asked, surprised. 3 years as a field medic. I saw things that most people can't imagine. When I came back to Earth, I felt like an alien in my own world." Jake felt some of the tension leave his shoulders. Finally, someone who really understood. "The question is," Dr. Kim continued, "what do you want to do about your situation at school?" "I want to protect Amy," Jake said immediately, "but I don't want to hurt anyone. Those two things don't have to be opposites. Sometimes the best way to protect someone is to show strength without using violence." Dr. Kim gave Jake some techniques for managing his stress and anger. They talked about the difference between military thinking and civilian problem-solving. By the time Jake left the office, he felt more centered than he had in weeks. But Tony Blake had other plans. The next day at school, Jake noticed something different. Tony wasn't alone anymore. He had recruited 2 older boys that Jake didn't recognize. They weren't students at Roosevelt High. They looked like they were in their 20s, with tattoos and hard faces. Jake watched them from across the cafeteria during lunch. His tactical mind automatically analyzed the new threat. These weren't high school bullies anymore. These were real troublemakers, possibly even criminals. Amy sat down at his table, ignoring his earlier request for her to stay away. "I heard Tony brought in some outside help," she said quietly. "You should go," Jake said. "This isn't safe anymore. I'm not leaving you to face this alone." Jake looked at her stubborn expression and felt a mix of admiration and fear. "Amy, you don't understand how dangerous this could get." "Maybe not," she said, "but I understand loyalty." That afternoon, Jake had a meeting with Mr. Wright after history class. The teacher had been keeping an eye on the situation and was worried about the escalation. "I've been teaching here for 15 years, Mr. Wright said. "I've seen bullies before, but Tony's getting desperate. Bringing in outsiders crosses a line. What should I do?" Jake asked, "Have you thought about talking to Principal Clark?" Jake shook his head. "She wouldn't believe me. And even if she did, she can't protect me outside school grounds." Mr. Wright nodded grimly. "You're right. This has gone beyond what the school can handle." That evening, Jake called Commander Torres again. This time, he had a specific request. "I need permission to reveal my service record to school officials," he said. "That's a big step, Martinez. Are you sure? They need to understand what they're dealing with. If something goes wrong, if I have to defend myself or someone else, they need to know why." Commander Torres was quiet for a moment. "I'll contact the principal tomorrow. But Jake, be very careful. Once people know what you are, everything changes." The confrontation came sooner than expected. Jake was walking home from his therapy session with Dr. Kim when Tony and his new friends cornered him in an empty parking lot behind a grocery store. It was after dark, and there were no witnesses around. "Well, well," Tony said, stepping out from behind a car. "Look who's all alone." Jake stopped walking and assessed the situation. 3 opponents, open terrain, multiple escape routes. But running would just delay the inevitable. Tony had escalated this beyond high school drama. "What do you want, Tony?" Jake asked calmly. "I want you to understand something," Tony said, his 2 friends flanking him. "This is my town, my school, and I don't like weird kids who think they're better than everyone else. I never said I was better than anyone. You don't have to say it. I can see it in your eyes. Like you know something the rest of us don't." Jake almost smiled at the irony. If only Tony knew how right he was. "Look," Jake said, "we don't have to do this. Just leave Amy alone, and we can both go our separate ways." "Too late for that," Tony said, nodding to his friends. The 2 older boys moved to surround Jake. One of them pulled out a knife. Everything changed in that moment. This wasn't bullying anymore. This was a real threat with real weapons. Jake's military training kicked in automatically. Time seemed to slow down as Jake's enhanced reflexes engaged. He could see the attack patterns before they developed, could predict each move before it was made. But instead of fighting, Jake did something unexpected. He started talking. "You're holding that knife wrong," he said conversationally to the boy on his left. "Grip's too tight. You'll lose control if you have to move fast." The boy looked confused and glanced at the knife in his hand. "And you," Jake said to the other one, "your stance is all wrong. Too much weight on your front foot. Easy to knock off balance." As if to demonstrate, Jake took a half step forward. The boy instinctively stepped back and stumbled slightly. "What the hell?" Tony muttered. Jake turned his attention to Tony himself. "You brought weapons to a fight with a high school student. That tells me you're either very stupid or very scared." "I'm not scared of you," Tony snarled. "You should be," Jake said quietly. His voice had changed, becoming colder and more controlled. Do you know what the kill ratio was for Terran Defense Corps soldiers against Kitharan warriors? 12-1. Want to know how I personally contributed to that statistic? The three boys exchanged nervous glances. Jake wasn't making sense, but something in his tone made them all take a step back. I've been trained to fight creatures that could tear a human in half with their bare claws. Jake continued, his eyes never leaving Tony's face. I've seen things that would give you nightmares for the rest of your life. And you think a kitchen, knife, and two amateur thugs are going to intimidate me? The boy with the knife was shaking now. Tony, man, this guy's crazy. But Jake wasn't crazy. He was just finally letting them see a glimpse of what he really was. Here's what's going to happen, Jake said, still in that same calm voice. You're going to put that knife away. You're all going to walk away. And tomorrow, you're going to leave Amy Foster alone. Forever. And if we don't? Tony asked, but his voice cracked slightly. Jake smiled, and it wasn't a friendly expression. Then you'll find out what a real fight looks like. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then the boy with the knife slowly put it back in his pocket. This isn't over, Tony said, but he was already backing away. Yes, it is, Jake replied. You just don't know it yet. As the three boys hurried away, Jake stood alone in the parking lot. His hands were shaking slightly from the adrenaline, but he hadn't thrown a single punch. He pulled out his phone and dialed Principal Clark's number. It was time to have a very important conversation. Principal Helen Clark stared at her computer screen in disbelief. The video call showed Commander Lisa Torres in her military uniform, sitting in what looked like a space station command center. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, Principal Clark said slowly. Jake Martinez is a decorated war veteran who served in combat against alien forces? That's correct, Commander Torres replied. Staff Sergeant Martinez volunteered for the most dangerous missions during the Kitharan conflict. He saved dozens of civilian lives and was instrumental in several key victories. Jake sat quietly in the chair next to Principal Clark's desk. He had arrived at school early that morning and asked for this meeting. Now he watched as his principal tried to process information that sounded like science fiction. He's 17 years old, Principal Clark said weakly. The Terran Defense Corps accepts volunteers at 16 with parental consent, Commander Torres explained. Jake's mother signed the papers after his father died in the early stages of the war. He wanted to make a difference. Principal Clark looked at Jake with new eyes. Why didn't you tell us any of this when you enrolled? I wanted to be normal, Jake said simply. I thought I could just be a regular student. The situation with the bullying has escalated beyond normal school discipline, Commander Torres said. Jake was threatened with weapons last night by individuals who are not students at your school. We felt you needed to understand the full context. Principal Clark rubbed her temples. What exactly are you telling me about Jake's capabilities? Jake spoke up before Commander Torres could answer. I'm not dangerous to other students, ma'am. I've been trained to protect people, not hurt them. But I have enhanced reflexes and combat training that most people don't understand. Enhanced? Reflexes? Jake held up his hand. Without warning, he caught a pen that Principal Clark had knocked off her desk without looking. He had moved so fast his hand was a blur. Principal Clark's mouth fell open. Jake volunteered for experimental neural enhancement programs, Commander Torres explained. It makes him faster and more aware of his surroundings. It also makes it very difficult for him to function in normal social situations. I see, Principal Clark said, though she clearly didn't see it all. An hour later, Jake walked into first period English class. Word had already spread somehow that he had been in the principal's office with some kind of military officer. Students whispered as he took his seat. Tony Blake was absent that day. So were his two friends from outside school. At lunch, Amy Foster sat down at Jake's table with a huge smile on her face. "I heard Tony got suspended," she said excitedly. "Someone said he was caught with weapons on school property." Jake nodded. Principal Clark had called Tony's parents after the meeting with Commander Torres. When they searched Tony's locker, they found the knife his friend had been carrying the night before. "What's going to happen now?" Amy asked. "I don't know," Jake admitted. "Everything's different now." Over the next few days, Jake's life at Roosevelt High School changed completely. Some students were afraid of him after rumors spread about his military background. Others were fascinated and kept asking him questions about space battles and alien wars. Jake found both reactions uncomfortable. He just wanted to be left alone to finish his education. The biggest change came from Mr. Wright, who asked Jake to help with a special project. "I want to start a conflict resolution program," Mr. Wright explained after history class. "Teaching kids how to handle bullying and violence without making things worse. I think your experience could help." "I'm not sure I'm the right person for that," Jake said. "I'm still figuring things out myself." "That's exactly why you're the right person. You understand both sides of conflict. You know what real violence looks like, and you know why it should be avoided." Jake thought about it and agreed to help. The first meeting was small, just a few students who had been bullied or had problems with anger. Jake felt nervous as he stood in front of the group. "I'm not here to teach you how to fight," he began. "I'm here to teach you how not to fight." He talked about de-escalation, about reading body language, about knowing when to walk away. He shared some of his experiences without going into detail about the alien war. "The strongest thing you can do," Jake said, "is protect someone who can't protect themselves. But you don't always have to use your fists to do that." Amy Foster raised her hand. "What if someone is bigger and stronger than you? Then you use your brain instead of your muscles," Jake replied. "Smart thinking beats brute force every time." After the meeting, several students thanked Jake for his advice. He realized that helping others was making him feel better about his own situation. 2 weeks later, Tony Blake returned to school. He was quieter now, more careful about who he bothered. His two outside friends were nowhere to be seen. Jake heard they had been arrested for carrying weapons near school property. Tony avoided Jake completely for the first few days. Then, surprisingly, he approached Jake after gym class. "I heard about your program," Tony said awkwardly. "The conflict resolution thing." Jake waited for him to continue. "Look, I know I was a jerk to you. And to Amy. I didn't know how to deal with someone who didn't react the way I expected. Apologizing to me isn't enough," Jake said. "You need to apologize to Amy." Tony nodded. "I already did. This morning. I also asked to join your program." Jake was surprised. "Why?" "Because I realized I don't know how to solve problems without trying to fight or intimidate people. Maybe you could teach me a better way." Jake studied Tony's face. He could tell the other boy was sincere. "It's not going to be easy. You'll have to change how you think about dealing with people." "I know, but I don't want to be the guy who needs to bring weapons to school to feel strong." Jake nodded slowly. "Okay, but you follow my rules. No more bullying anyone. Ever. Deal?" 3 months later, Jake stood on the stage in Roosevelt High School's auditorium. He was receiving an award for his conflict resolution program, which now had over 50 student participants. In the audience, he could see his mother Susan, who had finally learned the truth about his military service. She looked proud, but also sad, understanding now why her son had seemed so distant and troubled. Commander Torres was there too, having traveled from Luna Base for the ceremony. She would be presenting Jake with the military commendations he had never received for his. Service on Europa. Mr. Wright introduced Jake to the crowd. Jake Martinez has shown us that true strength comes not from the ability to hurt others, but from the wisdom to help them. Jake stepped up to the microphone. He looked out at the faces in the audience. Students who had been bullies were sitting next to students who had been victims. Amy Foster was in the front row, beaming with pride. 6 months ago, Jake began, I thought coming to this school would be the hardest thing I'd ever done. I was wrong. The hardest thing was learning that being strong doesn't mean being alone. He talked about the importance of community, about how everyone had something to offer and something to learn. He talked about second chances and the courage it takes to change. I learned that the best way to win a fight is to turn your enemy into a friend, Jake said, looking directly at Tony Blake, who sat in the third row. It's not always possible, but it's always worth trying. After the ceremony, Jake walked outside into the afternoon sunshine. Amy fell into step beside him. So, what happens now? She asked. College? Jake nodded. I'm going to study education and psychology. I want to help other veterans adjust to civilian life. That sounds perfect, Amy said. Jake smiled. For the first time since coming home from the war, he felt like he had found his place in the world. He was still a soldier at heart, but now he was fighting for something different. He was fighting for the chance to help others become better versions of themselves. As they walked toward the school parking lot, Jake's enhanced hearing picked up the sound of laughter from the playground where elementary school kids were playing. It was a sound worth protecting. He had finally learned that some battles were won not with weapons or enhanced reflexes, but with patience, understanding, and the willingness to believe that everyone could change. The war was over. The peace had begun.